Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. The company also leads in artificial intelligence, and its Google Bard in healthcare is already wowing patients with interactive and insightful chats. So now is the perfect time to CareTalk about Google's evolving role in healthcare and where it might all lead. Welcome to CareTalk, America's home for incisive debate about healthcare, business, and policy. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group.
And I'm John Driscoll, the president of Walgreens Health.
If you like CareTalk, the podcast, you'll love CareTalk, the newsletter. It's where you can read trending healthcare industry news, keep up with the latest podcast episodes and highlights, access original blog posts by healthcare thought leaders, and dive deeper into our podcast topics. Subscribe today, and you'll be entered into a chance to win your very own CareTalk baseball cap.
David, what's all this about Google and healthcare? I mean, we've been sort of hearing about Google and healthcare, gosh, for over a decade now, probably close to 15 years. What's going on?
John, I think you could consider Google is doing three things in healthcare broadly, because they're doing thousands of things really, but it breaks down into three areas. The first one relates to their search business. There's a lot that they do in search. People are looking for doctors, they're looking for information about who's in what provider directory, they're looking for information about medical conditions and so on. So that's the first one, is related to search, which Google excels at. The second one is really related to their cloud business. A lot of the things they talk about as technology solutions to enable care teams to deliver more connected care come down to that. It's actually led by the cloud part of the business and not something related to healthcare. And the third one is sort of these moonshot things, which is now sort of under the rubric of AI. They've got things where they're trying to do early cancer diagnosis, prevent blindness, things like that. So it's always three things, John, as a consultant, but I'd say it is three things for Google.
But David, I mean, Google has been talking about, I think I've met, 5 of the last 6 heads of Google Healthcare, and all of them have left pretty frustrated. And I think that the Google early on showed that search could be quite relevant to healthcare information. Google Flu Trends was an early, really useful indicator for parents and for healthcare professionals. They can leverage search because they're basically the dominant monopolist search provider to take keywords and to indicate what might be going on in health conditions, but they really haven't exploited that. And this whole moonshot thing, I mean, what have they solved? I mean, and cloud, they're actually behind in, the Microsoft's ahead, and I mean and you've got Oracle quickly growing in cloud based on their most recent earnings. It doesn't feel very coherent to me, and it's sort of like most other big tech companies, all talk, less tech, low performance in healthcare. I mean, do you think that Google can have an impact in healthcare?
Well, somebody woke up on the wrong side of the bed today. That's what I'll say. John, Google had you may have met 5 of the 6. The 6th person's probably in hiding in case they may meet you, and their head will roll shortly thereafter. But one of the things that happened early on, as mentioned, Google tries to organize the world's information. And there's the idea there that, hey, that information is valuable and useful and maybe correct. What they found out in healthcare when they first started in is a lot of the information in healthcare is actually garbage, John. And so what they did is that they tried to look at information out of electronic medical record, and they made a hash of it. What you describe as Google Flu Trends, that's actually data that's actually information that's a byproduct of data being generated through Google searches. That's valuable information. A lot of the information in the electronic medical record systems is actually garbage. And when they tried to organize that, that's when they got in trouble.
Well, I think it comes back to the fact that search really relies on structured data where it's all standardized in one way or another and tied together in ways that the ontology and the definitions in the order make sense. Leveraging the power of a lot of compute, they can take lots of information and provide, sort of snappy answers to quick questions that everyone is used to, so that it can turn Google into a verb. But but underneath that, I think there was an assumption that because much of the healthcare data is structured, that they would be able to build algorithms and insights on top of healthcare information. But what they found early on, I think they had full information to the electronic medical record, which is wherever all of your claims data sits. And they tried to tie it together and drive interesting insights. And I think they found at best a 30% match between individual identifiers like a social security number, a name, and a record that they could tie correctly to the patient. And so when you talk about garbage, it's really the inconsistency of the healthcare data that required them to really retrofit and rebuild a very clean record. Because unlike your favorite pastrami shop, David, it's the definitions in healthcare really need to be quite precise, and the indicators that it's you. It's almost a complete look. It's not just building a search algorithm on top of information that everyone agrees on, or most people agree on what the definitions are. It's really trying to tie out very precisely to the inputs, the data that's coming in, to try to drive better insights at the back end. And I think one of the reasons why Google's really struggled to do anything meaningful in healthcare, even though they've got the greatest amount of compute power, probably one of them in the world, plus search, is that the information still is pretty hard to standardize, simplify, and test in healthcare. And that's, I think, the surprise. But it's interesting. That's probably the biggest constraint on artificial intelligence, or really intelligence using computer power, is that the base data is often pretty inconsistent. And by inconsistent equals garbage in your more
in my trash
phraseology.
In my trash talk. Trash talk, exactly, John. Well, here's the thing. So they learned a couple things from before. One is that they probably need to work with partners. And one of the things that you see now when you go to their Google Health site, or you hear them talk about, is partner. So they're talking about partners all over the place, since they're not trying to reinvent the wheel or try to figure out this insider's game of healthcare. Another thing is that while the electronic medical record looks like structured data, most of the information is often in the unstructured notes part of the data. So there's a lot of fields and things that people have to fill in. But for example, when you're looking for clinical trials to identify participants, something like 75 or 80% of the relevant information about inclusion and exclusion criteria is actually in the unstructured part of the record. That's where artificial intelligence can come in, John.
Unstructured, yeah, and just the unstructured stuff is really the physician's notes or the nurse's notes or the output of what happens when a doctor, a nurse, or a tech actually talks to you and adds all of the personal idiosyncratic details of your very complicated case, Dave, to your record. But if they give you step back, Google really started not just as a search business, but the founders really believed that they wanted to build a search business that would vacuum up all this information, that would feed an artificial intelligence engine that would be able to drive really breakthrough insights. And so I think one of the reasons why they keep talking about and coming back to healthcare is if you think about an area where there's huge social need. And I think the founders' names were Larry and Sergey. I think when they started, they really wanted Google to, again, do no harm and actually contribute to the world. The reality is in healthcare data, the data is so complicated that they've really had a hard time leveraging all of that power of search because of, I think, of the flaws and inconsistencies of structured data, things like your medical claims, your diagnosis codes, and the alchemy of really unpacking and then standardizing that information that's in the unstructured notes. But they're approaching this thing through partnerships, but that's another way of saying they're not making any progress.
John, so another way to look at this, we've spoken, as we often do, from a U.S.-centric perspective. What Google Health is doing is actually fairly global. And in fact, when I mentioned partners, they're working with the World Health Organization on guidelines for health apps in low-income countries. Their first partner that they announced was a Kenya-based health company, which focuses on the health of expectant mothers and newborns. So they're using AI to replace the traditional ultrasound machines. We hear the leaders of Google Health talk about that. So there's a lot of that's going on. I would point out that there's a lot of do-gooders, from the rich world that want to go and do public health in the poor countries, and it doesn't always work out as well as we might hope.
Well, I mean, let's give them a little bit of credit. I mean, they have built some really interesting chatbots. I think they're working on those with the Mayo Clinic, and they early on partnered with the Mayo, which is one of the most esteemed healthcare hospital and service systems in the country. They've got their version of a generative AI. Everybody talks about GPT-3 and GPT-4, GPT whatever. Google's got a generative AI tool called Bard, which is very, very powerful actually, and is equivalent, I think, although hasn't gotten as much noise as the GPT family. And one of the things that I sort of admire about Google is they were holding back on letting these feral models, out there. By feral models, there's a real belief in the artificial intelligence community, which is really the computer science and machine learning community, that the models that Meta has just pushed out into the world, and generative AI models like ChatGPT-3 and ChatGPT-4 are really not ready for prime time because we don't really know how to control it. And so I think that Google, being a little bit more responsible, has been slow to deploy the full power of those models because they're probably more aware than most of how dangerous they are. And when you think about, all of the things that can go wrong in healthcare, if you're just a little bit wrong, I think that Google is actually, while they may not have made as much progress in healthcare, they actually are they have a tremendous amount of technology, and they're being actually one of the more responsible parties in deploying tools when they're ready to really be deployed that are less dangerous and misleading than some of the tools that are already out there.
Well, Google does have a big impact in healthcare, and that's because a lot of searches are related to healthcare information, and Google is dominant there. And one reason maybe that they've been careful is that they have something to lose, which is that people just type things into the Google search now. They call it Google diagnosing. And one of the reasons that they hooked up with Mayo Clinic a few years back was to say, instead of just displaying whatever the SEO people like if our producer Vincent were doing SEO, not for our show, but for some kind of crazy healthcare thing, they'd be at the top of the list. So now Mayo Clinic is there with Google, and Mayo has to sign off on what Google has. So a lot of times you'll see something is from Mayo Clinic. And so I think that they realize, hey, we can't have hallucinations in our chats with patients. But they've got their own group there, and they talk about how they've got this thing called MedPalm 2, their large language model for healthcare. And it not only did it pass a medical, licensing exams, it can pass them with flying colors, and it can give a lot more thorough explanations, not just give a multiple choice, A versus C versus B answer.
But what does that really mean, David? That a machine can fill? I mean, is that just rote memorization being fed back?
John, we've talked before about the shortage of healthcare workers, including even in our episode last week. And one of the things that's happened with the shortage of physicians is we've seen an increasing number of people with less training than physicians that have come on to the job. And so you can have somebody the choices are to make a physician more productive by surrounding them with others on a care team that are people, but that have somewhat less training and turning them loose on the patients. Or you can have another kind of thing, artificial intelligence, which there's no shortage of, and have that. So I think it's a valid other way. And I would rather have that my physician leverage AI than leverage people that have less training.
Well, David, how does Google, in your view, stack up to the other tech players like Apple and Amazon, the other pretenders to the healthcare technology throne?
Yeah. So what Apple has great devices and great consumer-oriented devices. So I have my Apple Watch I've had for a long time. And now Google bought Fitbit. One of the 50 things that they announced that they're doing is with Fitbit. When have you last heard about Fitbit? You used to have a Fitbit, John, back when that was
pointless. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the Google purchase of Fitbit is the kind of thing that makes everybody in healthcare scratch their heads as to why people in technology aren't more thoughtful about approaching it. But I think Google's got so much money that it's sort of like Elon Musk and Twitter. It's probably a nice toy for them. I mean, I think the theory behind Fitbit was that the fitness trackers were taking over the world, and because they're in the information of leveraging information to learn from information, it felt like a source of vacuuming up plenty of information. But it's not like Fitbit isn't among the many tools that you could could use to track fitness. But you go to health conferences and Google's booth is filled with all kinds of different Fitbits that don't appear to be selling.
They're good. That's why they have so many available in the booth, John, because they're not out being sold. Apple just has the one which sells it. So you asked me about these different companies. Okay, so Apple, I think, has devices. They have the whole ecosystem. They're less focused on just completely...
Slow down. So how do you grade Apple in its ecosystem? Forget the fact that you bought every Apple device known to man. Tell me a little bit about how you think Apple's making progress or not in healthcare, because Tim Cook has said this is generationally important for Apple.
Yeah, I think their devices are good. I think that if you look at the market share of just the regular iPhones, physicians love using iPhones. They have a very high share. So they've done a lot with their devices that are useful in healthcare, and people will go to those devices. The whole sort of bring your own device, movement came about because people want to bring their iPhone into the hospital. So I think Apple, I give them a grade of A. A is for Apple. Now, Amazon, we already used the A, so they're not getting an A.
Well, wait. If Tim Cook wants to make progress, you're saying progress in healthcare, you're going to give an A for selling more junk into hospitals and people? Like we're all buying their stuff, but is that really helping us in healthcare?
Yeah, it helps a lot. I like, I'll stop talking about the Apple Watch, John, but they're helpful at the consumer level. We talk about the consumerization of healthcare. They've actually done a lot, John. The same way that people think about, would I rather go into a Walgreens or my hospital, which is going to be more friendly, right? They walk into a Walgreens, they're there, they're greeted, things are on the shelf. They can talk to the pharmacist without an appointment usually. Compare that going to the hospital, right? That's what Apple is like compared to traditional devices that were used. It's friendly. I want to use this thing, and don't give me. I have this Apple I use all the time. Don't make me use this clunky junk when I go into the hospital. I want to use my own device, John. So that's what they're doing. They're making it easy for consumers and for physicians.
I'm with you, but I don't think of my devices as friendly. I mean, I think you're you really are in love with your devices. You're anthropomorphizing them. I mean, your device, it's hardware, David.
John, you're lucky I didn't give Walgreens a W on their report card. So
talk to me a little bit about so you're my device crazy partner in crime here loves Apple. That's fine, but they haven't really made much progress. Although their monitoring devices are bringing more to the power. I mean, the fact that I've had friends who've identified their arrhythmias or atrial fibrillation, blah 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 blah, which is a very serious heart condition based on just wearing the Apple Watch. What about
not the Fitbit?
Amazon? What about
Amazon? So unlike Google or Apple, Amazon is actually trying to compete with the hospital systems. And so they've got things like Amazon Care. They are actually doing, in terms of distribution of products, they sell a lot of products into physician offices, just like they do with any small business. Their devices are terrible. And they've had a lot of stops and starts, right? So they started.
I love my Kindle.
Great. Don't try to talk to him about your health issues, John. I mean, it's good for books. I like the Kindle too, but it's good for books. That's where Amazon started, with books. So that's Amazon. They haven't done as well. I think that somebody like Walmart is more of a threat, because what they go after in healthcare is cost. And that's what matters to a lot of people. Forget about how great this, that, or the other technology is. If I can't afford it, it's no good. And Walmart understands that. So that's how they're different. That's very different.
So I didn't ask about Walmart, but thanks for bringing it up. But on Amazon, they bought that online pharmacy. It's taken them years to integrate that, years and years and years. They actually use the ESI to really administer that. So I'm not sure they're going to make a big impact there. They bought One Medical, which is sort of a digitally enabled primary care for the tech-friendly, healthy people who don't really need chronic care.
Yeah, somebody doesn't need an experienced physician.
They've talked a lot about...
As long as you don't need an experienced physician, One Medical is perfect. That's like when they have law students, they say like 1L. That's like One Medical. It's like 1D.
Exactly. So they're not really that serious, but it's interesting that because healthcare represents 20% of the American economy, and healthcare has got a lot of challenges of cost and complexity, all these technology companies really stumble or certainly are slower to make big contributions than any of us would expect, given the power that they have. I mean, do you think that's going to change? I mean, do you think that our friends at Google will finally be able to have some breakthroughs in either these moonshot ideas or just in the basics of accessing and getting care, hopefully drive better outcomes at a lower cost? I mean, what's Google's play here?
I don't agree with you about Google making an impact or not. I think they've made an impact. I think what happens is that they're about organizing the world's information. A lot of the world's information is healthcare information, and they're organizing it as best as they can.
You don't think the world's information? No, they're not. They don't. You're just swallowing the whole. They're here to organize the world's. No, they're here to retrieve the world's information in an accessible, user-friendly way. They don't create the information. They don't even. Well, they curate it to some degree, but people are basically, I mean, the great benefit of their business is the more people search, the smarter the search engine gets. So in some ways, it's not organizing the world's information. It's organizing the world to help them get information, and then taking all that labor that we do and all of the insights that we provide, because they're sucking up our information, our personal information, our purchasing habits, our behaviors, and then making money by selling ads. I mean, this whole, organize the world's information. They're not like the great library of the world, David. They're the great ad machine of the world.
Yeah. So the issue, when you think about Google, you got to remember, you're not the customer. You're the product. They're looking at what you're doing.
Correct.
And let me just go. And you've been the one who's been, like you're trying to put me on my back foot that I'm defending Google. I'm just explaining it to you, John. But let's go back to this thing about using AI to replace traditional ultrasound machines in places that can't afford ultrasound machines. John, I'll answer my own question here, so I won't put you on the spot. But if you look at poor countries, low-income countries that use ultrasound, what do they use ultrasound for, John? Ultrasound is used for sex-selective abortions. And that's what it's used for in India and China. And what do you think is going to happen if you don't actually even need the machine and can use AI? So that's a real issue to be concerned about.
Well, no, I think it's true. Anytime you deploy technology, you're never quite sure, particularly given the variety of countries, behaviors, cultures that are involved. But okay, David, now that we've successfully identified all of the failures of tech, where all these people are making more money and have more complicated jobs than our own, now that we've criticized them, what is your advice for these tech giants now that we've identified what's wrong? What's your advice to Google to have a big impact on healthcare?
John, my advice would be similar to what the flight attendants tell you, which is, sit back, relax, and enjoy the fine service. There's a lot of information out there, and it's coming in, and people need help with it, and they're going to end up going to Google by default. They need to make sure they don't lose the AI race. And so I think that they're being very smart, and they should continue to position themselves as a responsible player in AI. And then after the dust settles, they're going to be in the driver's seat. John, I'll let you give your answer, and then we're going to close out here.
So, David, while your tray is not in the upright and locked position, I think let's keep it simple. Why doesn't Google take on cleaning up all the dumb administrative problems in healthcare? My explanation of benefits doesn't make any sense. The bills are complicated, and there's probably 20% of all healthcare costs that are tied to administrative hassles that if we could standardize, simplify, and automate the use of that information, we could cut costs tomorrow. Let's stop trying to cure cancer, and how about they just fix the bills and how people get paid? I think that would be super helpful, David, and that I would sort of aim a little bit lower than curing cancer to just solve some of the basic challenges in healthcare.
Oh, that makes sense, John. And that's what the cloud unit says they're doing with that, with their claims data activator and claims acceleration suite. So we'll tell them to accelerate the accelerator. Well, that's it for yet another edition of Care Talk. We've been talking today about Google Health and whether they've been successful or will be successful and what advice they should have. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group.
And I'm John Driscoll, the president of Walgreens Health. If you like what you heard, we'd love you to subscribe on your favorite service.